email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part 2 of my discussion with Dr. Brent Walkenhorst. We pick up our conversation talking about company policies around wireless security and how the Bastille platform can support those security efforts.
So, supporting organizations' wireless policy enforcement implies they have a wireless policy. And
good point.
No, it's a good question because many organizations do for certain use cases, but then there's a whole lot that don't really have any policy of any kind. So let me touch on that dichotomy. So we have a number of customers in government organizations, in commercial data centers is a great example. Sometimes executive suites where there is some amount of control and there is a policy about what can come in, and maybe there is some kind of physical security enforcement or attempt at enforcement to ensure that what comes in comes back out. And again, that depends on the organization. It depends on their use case. But that whole grouping of organizations that really care, they may have very strict device policies. And Bastille can identify wireless emissions within their facilities. We can use whitelisting capabilities to allow authorized devices. So even the very strict policies probably are going to allow for some things like glucose monitors and other medical devices, right? So we can whitelist those devices and then display anything that hasn't been previously authorized. And then organizations can decide how they want to go about dealing with that, right? It could issue an alert. It could just be someone looking at a screen. It could be something where they integrate with some other system that allows them to do some active measure to ensure that connectivity doesn't get established. There's all kinds of things they could do. And we work with customers to help them figure that out. And then there's the other side of the coin where organizations maybe have very lax policies, very open policies, or maybe no policies at all. And that's where it gets a little harder. So those environments are challenging. They require more analytics to come to bear on those problems to identify unhealthy behaviors. And we help our customers identify, a certain set of unhealthy behaviors, like the evil twin attack that I mentioned from the drone. We can identify that and alert on that kind of activity. But the challenging environment, of the wireless space and the cyberspace, this landscape is constantly evolving. So we're constantly working to improve our capabilities in that area, and that is an ongoing challenge, like any cybersecurity company, right? So it really depends on where you are, but we help them with their enforcement in different ways depending on the style of policy that they have in place.
I can't even imagine what that must look like, because when I get on my home network, I can't identify half the stuff that's connected. I'm like, what is that? And so I can't imagine with glucose monitors and all this other stuff, the amount of horsepower it would take to go figure out what it is, where it came from is just, man, it's got to be staggering.
Our system is pretty intensive. So the sensors themselves are scanning very rapidly with multiple RF channels, demodulating a whole bunch of crap in parallel, and trying to make sense out of it. So what you get at the end of the day is one of our user interfaces allows you to visualize the locations of emissions with icons on a floor plan, and then you can dig into those into their metadata. There's other interfaces, of course. You can access the database in different ways, but having that visual, I think, helps to sort of bring it together. And then you can actively filter. So say I want to just look at one specific network and see what's on there. Just a click of a button and you focus on that network and that's all you see. And now you can begin to start making sense out of that. But this is all very intensive for a human to process. So that's why we try to bring analytics to bear on these problems to help us automate and make sense of this mess, because there's a lot of stuff going on.
Is this something that, when you talk about the analytics, is that something that AI can help with?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's part of what we work on, and that's going to be that's going to be continue to be part of our roadmap, is developing not just AI, many different tools, but AI is definitely part of the puzzle.
Yeah, after this call, I'm going to go home and install a camera on my roof to make sure there's no drones, and I'm going to have to turn off all my remote controls. Use Zigbee. I got to get rid of those.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
They'll figure something new out. I'll never be able to get rid of them all.
Yeah.
So as the technology landscape continues to evolve, what future developments or enhancements do you foresee to keep your platform relevant and in the forefront of the wireless security? You got to foresee the next drone, right? That's the point.
That's right.
You got to see what's coming.
That's right. Well, there's lots of tools for video surveillance, and you could use those. We're not going to tackle that problem. We do what we do well, and you can integrate that with other tools. But I've already hinted at one of the pieces of what you're asking about, the future roadmap for Bastille. One thing that we're very focused on right now is building out and maintaining our threat library. And like I mentioned before, this is an ever-evolving landscape. So this is not something that I anticipate we're going to finalize in the next few weeks or months and put a bow on it and declare success. This is something that we will continue to iterate on and create new and updated versions, much like the rest of the cybersecurity industry, right? Like when I was growing up, actually, so viruses weren't really a problem, but they began to be a problem, and then you had all these companies coming out with virus definitions, and it's never sufficient to just lock it in and be done, right? You have to constantly update those, flow them out to customers, make sure people are patching their systems. And as that evolved into more sophisticated solutions that weren't just about specific signature identification, it was more kind of a holistic approach to identifying bad behavior. We have monitoring systems, MDR, XDR kinds of solutions that again also have to update their capabilities as new and emerging threats come on board. So I think we're in the same boat. We're going to continue to work on that. That's part of our roadmap for the foreseeable future. We're going to also continue to work on building new integrations. We talked about integrations before. We built dozens of them, and we'll continue to build them based on customer needs. And of course, we're always keeping an eye on protocols and both wireless and cyber standards to make sure that we're always integrating the latest and keeping our customers up to date on the latest requirements that are out there.
Okay. I think you maybe touched on this next question along the way anyway, but let me just go ahead and ask it in case you want to elaborate. But
sure.
How does your platform differentiate itself from other security solutions available in the market?
Good. I would say the biggest difference is in what we call the platform, our wireless threat intelligence platform. So there are many threat intelligence platforms out there, but none of them really do wireless. So that first word is the key differentiator. There are solutions out there that touch Wi-Fi, but they don't seem to have the level of visibility that Bastille's system has. So I think that's really the biggest difference. And I think our ability to penetrate deeply into that space probably comes from a number of factors. We look at multiple protocols. I mentioned them before, but they're Wi-Fi, cellular, Bluetooth Low Energy, and a whole host of IoT protocols. We provide accurate localization of 1 to 3 meters. Our spec is 3, but very often we get 1 meter or less accuracy. Other products that we've seen maybe produce heat maps. Maybe they're of individual devices, that makes it hard to visualize, or maybe they're an aggregate, which is not very useful. But however, their mechanism of identifying that information, they typically have accuracies of on the order of 10 meters or more. So that's a pretty big difference. And then, of course, we have the historical data. So a combination of our ability to see multiple protocols, accurately localize those emissions, and have access to history to enable auditing and forensic analysis. Those seem to come together to differentiate us from many of the things that I've seen that even a little bit touch the wireless domain. So.
No, it's pretty intense. 1 meter. That's getting right down to the nitty gritty.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is. Can you discuss any significant milestones that your team has achieved in the development of your platform?
Yeah, I think the first major one was one I already talked about. It's the the ability to detect and localize individual cell phones. That was a huge, I think that was key in helping us create a product that fit the market. Because when that
Right.
came out, that's when we really started to grow. Another major milestone for us was our ability to detect and localize individual devices in Bluetooth networks that had been paired and connected. This, unless you dig into the details, it doesn't sound very impressive, but the way this works is there are multiple channels in the Bluetooth and BLE specs. And for Bluetooth, for example, there's 80, I believe, and only 3 of them are advertising channels. The rest are traffic channels, but the Bluetooth spec allows for, well, not allows, it requires devices to hop in frequency. So they're constantly hopping across the traffic channels with some sequence that's known only to the pairs or the pair of devices. So Bluetooth sniffers typically are just looking at those advertising channels, but once a device pairs, they no longer talk on those channels. So you lose the device. And for us, that's huge because once a device pairs, that's when it becomes a potential problem. When it's just
Right.
advertising, it's not connected to anything, so who cares? I mean, it's nice to know that it's there, but what's really useful is when it connects, can I tell that something's going on? So we created some patented capabilities that allowed us to not only to look at all of those channels simultaneously, but then to tease out the individual devices so that we could focus on them and localize them separately rather than in aggregate. So that required a bit of work, and that was a significant challenge. Other milestones along the way include things like the development of portable systems that come in Pelican cases that you can quickly set up and deploy, ruggedized sensors for outdoor deployments, detection filters and other related tools that sort of laid the foundation for our automated detection and adjudication capabilities. And then, of course, integrations with third-party systems like Splunk, Aruba, Cisco, Linnell, and many others. So that's a sampling of some of the challenges along the way.
Yeah, pretty impressive what you guys have done.
Thank you.
So how has your customer feedback influenced the ongoing development and enhancement of your features and capabilities of your system? I'm assuming since you have all the hooks, you must be taking customer feedback and processing that.
We do take customer feedback. Our customers have been very particular thus far about having on-premise solutions. So we don't access our customers' data to process it and tease out things unless they invite us to, which is always nice because sometimes it's nice to look over someone's shoulder and tap on the keyboard and make some sense out of things. So we have customers who are constantly bringing us in for various things. And they provide probably the most valuable feedback that we have. So our early adopters have been incredibly helpful and open with feedback. And we take that under advisement. We analyze the requests. We consider the complexity and the challenge of addressing the request in a way that doesn't break our architecture. So you kind of rank those and decide, what's the most efficient way to address the concerns and the challenges, and then we begin to evolve that. So, one customer of ours spends a lot of time focusing on device behavior, and they're siphoning all this data and trying to make sense out of the haystack. and some of their feedback has been incredibly helpful for us in terms of what kinds of things they are seeing in their environment, as well as what kinds of things concern them that they are looking for. And we've used that feedback to help inspire some of our capabilities that get flowed out to them, but also to many others to help automate detection and adjudication.
This last question is I think it's kind of tied into a bunch of stuff we've already talked about, but in the face of all these constant changes in the security landscape, in the wireless security landscape, how does your team stay informed about these emerging threats and ensure that your platform is one step ahead?
Yeah, good question.
Crystal ball.
Yes, that's what we do. It's magic. We try to monitor the cybersecurity research that's out there. There's a lot of good work that goes on. White hat hackers, ethical hackers. who are looking at potential problems. They identify vulnerabilities, they disclose them responsibly, they publish them. So we try to take from that body of research, and garner whatever value we can from the wireless perspective, because there's a lot of stuff that's wired that doesn't really pertain to what we do. So we're constantly monitoring that area, and then we also conduct some of our own research internally, taking things that are out there that we have seen and closing the loop between behaviors and detectable data, things that we can see that would indicate some kind of anomaly or some unhealthy behavior. So I don't know if I can elaborate much more than that. Really, we just try to stay on top of what's out there in terms of publications, conduct our own research, and just try to stay ahead of the game. It's a constant cat and mouse game in security, so we're just trying to stay ahead of it.
Yeah, they're unfortunately constantly evolving, so you can never stand still, for sure.
Right.
So as a wrap up, I'm going to ask 3 questions that I always ask everybody that comes on the podcast. First one is, are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the most important things that I try to do is to listen. That probably sounds really simple, but I find it to be extremely powerful. Everybody has a unique perspective, and everyone has the potential to offer some insights that make our company and our products better. So I try to listen across the board with everybody that I interact with, but I really try hard, especially to listen carefully to my direct reports. So people who rely on me for guidance, I want them to know that I am always accessible. And of course, at any given moment, I may not be available, but I want to be available as soon as possible to address those needs, concerns, questions, whatever they might be. And with that deep listening, where I seek to understand someone else, sometimes it's as simple as just validating them as a person. Maybe they didn't feel validated for some reason, and I can help bring that connection to the company, to that interaction. Sometimes I'm able to dig deep and maybe offer some insights to that person, maybe teach them something that they didn't know. And the most satisfying interactions are when they come up with ideas that point me in a new direction, that help teach me something that shifts my perspective or broadens it in some way. So I begin to see more of the landscape more accurately. So anyway, I just think listening is so key, and that's one of the things that I really focus on as a leader.
I've had some authors come on the show to talk about communication, and having done my own research as well, that's one of the things that I think is surprising. One of the things that can make you a great communicator is exactly what you just described, is listening. The ability to listen and listen deeply, as you put it, is what really makes a good communicator, because as you said, you're trying to understand what their perspective is, where they come from, and if nothing else, to validate. And you could, and I don't like to drift into politics, but you look at the world today and there's not a lot of deep listening going on. There's just a bunch of yelling going on.
Yeah.
And the other thing you said that really resonated with me is broaden your horizons. And I think people are so pigeonholed these days in where they are and what they want to do, that not only do they not even open themselves up to hear other opinions, but if they did hear it, they would just reject it automatically, as opposed to listening, going, I didn't think about it that way. I see where you're coming from, and understanding that other person.
Yeah, I agree with you, Clint. We could use a bit more open-mindedness, and maybe, if you're listening to this, I would encourage you to seek out sources of material that don't agree with your preconceived notions, that challenge them, and see if you can read them with an open mind. Not necessarily to force yourself to change your opinion. You can keep it, but just maybe expose yourself to why someone is saying something different. That can really open our minds and our hearts to, well, maybe a little less fighting in the world. I don't know. But at the very least, you might learn something.
Yeah, maybe they're not actually evil and stupid. Maybe they have a reason for their opinion. Even if you don't ever agree with it,
Yep.
You can understand the validity of that opinion and where they got it from.
Yeah, exactly. Spot on.
So what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Man, that's hard. I've been given a lot of good advice over the years. I think the one that occurs to me as being really helpful right now is to live in the moment. This might also seem trite, I don't know, but I find in my life, I am often tempted, being very analytically minded, especially, I get tempted to live in the past or the future, to look to the past and rehash old events, to look to the future and attempt to prognosticate where it's going. And those activities are useful to some extent because we want to learn from our past and we want to plan for our future. But those activities occur in the present. And really, that's where all life occurs. And I found that when I bring my attention to this moment, I do certain things, like I can listen deeply. I can't listen deeply if I'm living in the past, or if I'm focusing on something they said and planning a counter argument. I'm not actually here. And I can't bring my whole self to the conversation and listen deeply. And there's a whole host of other things that come into play when I begin to live in this moment. I find I unlock sources of creativity that might have been bound up in my nonsensical mental games in the past and the future. I just find that I'm happier, I'm more joyful, I'm more peaceful, and I can bring my best self to everything that I'm doing when I really do that. I can't say that I do it all the time, but it's a great piece of advice. When you can follow it, it's good. Yeah.
So what's the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
There was an article that I read recently that is relevant to the topic of conversation. So maybe I'll touch on that one. This was an in-depth article on the 2020 solar winds attack. So this was what appears to be nation-state hackers. No one knows for sure, but the forensics suggest that this was an organization, likely from Russia, that was targeting corporations and government organizations through a very well-planned, well-executed, and very patient attack. And I think, I don't know how to digest a big in-depth article that looks at history and tells a great story. I don't know how to digest that into a simple soundbite. But one thing that comes out of that for me is some types of attackers have incredible patience. And they're going to throw us for a loop sometimes, like what happened in 2020 with this style of attack, and really has shifted the cybersecurity landscape a little bit. It has caused people to focus on a style of attack that didn't exist before. It's that software supply chain attack. And so there's conversations that go on about that now because these attackers were so patient. I think it's, we just have to be ready for anything. We have to be ready for the twists and turns that the world is going to throw at us in the form of attackers, hackers, or whatever. What things are going to happen, and we need to be able to adapt, to not be locked into a certain way of thinking, so that we can address new and emerging challenges when they come. And maybe that's a good summary of that.
No, I think it's great. And speaking of living in the moment, was that really 3 years ago? I feel like the solar winds thing was really just like a couple months ago. Man, time just flies.
Yeah, it does.
that for you, that was probably 55 different things ago. But yeah, for me, it's just like yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, Brad, this has really been great. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Thanks, Clint. Appreciate you having me on board.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.